The slave trader's whip cracked against the small, trembling body covered in burlap, and 17-year-old Wren did something that would either save her life or end it. She spent her last 5 copper coins on a creature everyone else had deemed worthless. But that decision was still minutes away. Right now, she was just trying to get close enough to the vegetable stalls to grab the cabbage ends before the pigs did. The dregs market sprawled across the mudflats outside Blackmoor territory like an infection the packlords pretended didn't exist. Once a month, when the moon was dark and the border patrols looked the other way, criminals and desperate folk gathered to trade in things that couldn't see daylight. Stolen jewelry. Illegal potions that could make a man forget his own name. Sometimes, if the traders were feeling bold, living merchandise. Wren had been coming here since she was 13. Not to buy. She'd never had enough coin for that. She came for the scraps. The bruised apples the fruit sellers threw at beggars. The wilted herbs the potion makers deemed too far gone. The cabbage ends. For years of surviving on cabbage ends. She pulled her mother's shawl tighter around her thin shoulders and wove through the crowd. The fabric was more holes than wool now, but she couldn't bring herself to throw it away. It still smelled faintly of rosemary and would smoke, if she pressed her nose to it hard enough. The crowd was thick tonight. Too thick. Something was happening near the center of the market, and people were pressing forward to see, their emotions hitting Wren like waves of dirty water. Curiosity. Disgust. Excitement. That last one made her stomach turn. Excitement at the dregs market usually meant someone was about to suffer. She should keep moving. Find her cabbage ends, fill her pockets with whatever else she could scavenge, and get back to her shack before the real predators came out. The ones who didn't bother with auction blocks and preferred to take what they wanted from packless girls who had no one to miss them. But her feet wouldn't cooperate. They carried her toward the crowd instead, slipping between bodies, ducking under elbows, until she could see what everyone was staring at. A wooden platform had been erected in the mud. On it stood a man with a face like spoiled meat, all red and lumpy and wrong. He wore the leather apron of a slave trader, stained with substances Wren didn't want to identify. At his feet lay a small figure. Burlap sack over its head. Wrists bound with rope that had cut into the skin badly enough to bleed. Body so thin Wren could count the ribs through the torn shirt. Wounds everywhere, infected and weeping, giving off a smell that made several people in the crowd cover their noses. "Come on now," the trader shouted, his voice carrying over the murmur of the crowd. "Someone give me a decent offer." "Wolf pup, barely used." "Barely alive," more like, someone yelled back, and laughter rippled through the gathering. The trader's face went redder. He kicked the figure, and it curled tighter into itself but made no sound. "Fine, it's damaged. I'll admit that. Brain's not right, hasn't spoken a word since we acquired it. Probably feral, maybe cursed. But the organs are still good. Someone must want wolf organs. Good for potions, good for—" "I wouldn't feed that thing to my dogs," a woman called out. More laughter. The trader's partner, a wiry man with nervous eyes, leaned in and said something Wren couldn't hear. The main trader nodded, his expression shifting from frustration to cold practicality. "Right then. No bidders, no sale. We'll harvest it ourselves and sell the parts. At least we'll get something for our trouble." He reached for the knife at his belt. And Wren felt it. Not the fear, though that was there too, radiating off the small body like heat from a fever. No, beneath the fear, buried so deep she almost missed it, was something else. A consciousness. Vast. Deep. Watching. Whatever was under that burlap sack wasn't feral. It wasn't brain damaged. It was hiding. Deliberately making itself seem worthless, seem broken, seem not worth the effort of keeping alive. It was the most sophisticated emotional deception Wren had ever sensed, and she'd spent 4 years reading the intentions of every person who looked at her too long in the market. Her hand went to the pouch at her waist before she could think. 5 copper coins. Everything she had. Everything she'd scraped together over 3 months of selling herbs to the potion makers who didn't ask where a Packless Omega got her supplies. 5 coppers meant food for another week. Meant the difference between surviving the coming winter and not. 5 coppers couldn't possibly be worth whatever was lying on that platform. 5 coppers, she heard herself say. The crowd went quiet. Then it went loud, everyone laughing at once. Did that mudrat just bid on the defective? Someone held. The trader stared at her, knife still in his hand. You're joking. 5 coppers. Ren held up the pouch, shaking it so the coins clinked together. That's my bid. Girl, I could get more than that selling its teeth. Then why haven't you? She pushed forward until she was at the edge of the platform, looking up at him. You've been trying to move this merchandise for an hour. I've watched. No one wants it. No one's going to want it. You can spend the next 2 hours cutting it up and hoping someone buys the pieces, or you can take my 5 coppers and go drink away the loss. The trader's partner tugged at his sleeve again, whispering urgently. Probably pointing out that they still had other merchandise to sell, and they were losing the crowd to this spectacle. The trader spat into the mud. Fine. Take your worthless purchase. He snatched the pouch from her hand, counted the coins, and then kicked the bound figure off the platform. It landed at Ren's feet with a soft thud and didn't move. No refunds, the trader called as he turned away. And don't come crying to me when it dies before you get it home. Getting the creature back to her shack took the better part of an hour. It couldn't walk, or wouldn't, Ren wasn't sure which. She ended up half carrying, half dragging it through the mud and the dark, staying off the main paths where the patrol wolves might smell them. A Packless Omega with an unknown shifter would raise questions she couldn't answer. Her shack sat at the edge of the forbidden forest, a leaning structure of scavenged wood and stolen canvas that she'd built herself over 3 winters. It wasn't much. A fire pit in the center, a pallet of straw and rags in the corner, a shelf of dried herbs and roots she used for trading. But it was hers. The only thing that was. She laid the creature on the pallet and went to light a candle. When she came back with the flame, her hands were shaking. She'd expected a wolf pup. Something young and small and animal, something she could nurse back to health or at least give a peaceful death. What she found when she cut away the burlap sack was a boy. 12 years old, maybe 13, hard to tell under all the dirt and damage. Skin so pale it was almost translucent, showing blue veins beneath. Hair that might have been silver under the matted blood and filth. A face that was all sharp angles and hollowed cheeks, the face of someone who hadn't eaten properly in a very long time. But his eyes. His eyes were sealed shut. Not closed. Sealed. Some kind of dark substance had been poured over them and allowed to harden, forming a black crust that covered his eyelids and spread across his temples like a disease. Magic. Old magic, and bad. Okay, Ren whispered to herself. Okay. First we clean the wounds. Then we figure out the eyes. Then we what? She'd bought a dying child with her last coins. She had no food, no medicine, no plan. She had a bucket of water from the stream and some willow bark and a half-empty jar of honey she used to keep wounds from going septic. It would have to be enough. She started with the wounds on his arms, dipping a rag in the water and cleaning away the pus and dried blood as gently as she could. The boy didn't react. Didn't flinch, didn't cry out, didn't do anything except breathe in shallow, uneven gasps. She worked her way across his chest, his back, his legs. The wounds were everywhere, some old enough to have scarred badly, others fresh enough to still be bleeding. Whip marks. Burn marks. Things she couldn't identify and didn't want to. Someone had hurt this child systematically, over a long period of time. Ren had seen cruelty before. She'd lived in its shadow her whole life. But this was something else. This was deliberate destruction, the kind meant to break something completely. "What did they do to you?" she murmured. No response. She hadn't expected one. She reached for his face, intending to examine the dark substance over his eyes more closely, and his hand shot up and grabbed her wrist. She froze. His grip was iron. Impossible, given how weak he should have been, how damaged his body was. But his fingers dug into her skin with a strength that made her bones ache. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I'm trying to help." He didn't let go. But after a long moment, his grip loosened slightly. She took that as permission to continue. The substance over his eyes wasn't coming off. She tried water, tried oil, tried gently scraping at the edges with her fingernail. Nothing worked. Whatever magic had sealed his sight was beyond anything she knew how to fix. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I don't know how to help with this. I'll figure something out. Tomorrow I'll go to the forest and look for herbs, or maybe I can trade something for a potion that might." His hand tightened on her wrist again. Not painfully this time. More like he was trying to get her attention. Then he opened his mouth. Ren leaned closer. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then sounds started coming out, soft, hoarse, barely audible. But definitely words. Definitely language. Not the common tongue. Not the old dialects the border packs sometimes used. Something else entirely. Something that rolled and sang and seemed to resonate in Ren's chest like a second heartbeat. She knew what it was. Everyone knew, even if no one had heard it spoken in 3 centuries. The ancient language of the first wolves. The language of the royal bloodline. The language that had died out when the last wolf king was slaughtered and his entire house burned to ash. Ren sat back on her heels, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. What have I bought? Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel too. Get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 2. She named him Ash. Not because he told her to, he still hadn't spoken a word she could understand. But on the 3rd morning, when the fever finally broke and some color returned to his hollow cheeks, the early light caught his hair just right. Silver gray, like the remains of a fire gone cold. "Ash," she said, testing the word. "That's what I'll call you until you tell me different." He turned his head toward her voice, those sealed eyes somehow tracking her movement across the shack. Then he gave the smallest nod. It was the first time he'd responded to anything she'd said. Ren told herself the tears on her face were from exhaustion. The weeks that followed were the hardest of her life, and that was saying something for a girl who'd been surviving alone since she was 13. Ash couldn't keep food down at first. His body had forgotten how to process anything more substantial than broth, so Ren spent hours boiling bones she begged from the butcher's refuse pile, adding whatever herbs she could find to make the thin liquid more nourishing. She gave him her portions. Told herself she wasn't hungry, that she'd eaten while he was sleeping, that the hollow ache in her stomach was just nerves. The lies came easier when she watched him drink, when she saw the tremors in his hands start to steady. The medicine was harder. His wounds weren't healing right. The infections kept coming back, spreading despite her best efforts with honey and willow bark. He needed real medicine, the kind the apothecaries sold to pack wolves who could afford it. Ren had nothing left to sell. Nothing except. She looked at her mother's shawl, hanging on the nail by the door. More holes than fabric. Practically worthless. But it was handwoven from mountain goat wool, and the merchant who bought antiques sometimes paid good coin for traditional crafts. It's just a thing, she told herself as she folded it carefully. Things don't matter. People matter. She got 12 coppers for it. Enough for a small vial of healing tincture that cleared Ash's infections within 3 days. She didn't cry when she handed over the shawl. She waited until she was back in the forest, alone, before she let herself break. Ash learned the layout of the shack within a week. It shouldn't have been possible. His eyes were sealed shut, the dark magic still crusted over them despite everything Ren tried. But he moved through the small space like he'd lived there his whole life, never bumping into the table, always knowing exactly where the water bucket sat, reaching for things before Ren even offered them. "How do you do that?" she asked one evening, watching him navigate around the fire pit to sit on his usual spot on the pallet. He tilted his head, listening. "You can't see." "I know you can't see. But you never trip, you never miss." She paused. "Can you sense things somehow? Like I sense emotions?" His hand came up, pressing flat against his chest. Then he pointed at his ear. Then at his nose. Then he made a gesture she didn't understand, fingers spreading outward from his forehead like rays of light. "You use your other senses," she said slowly. "And something else. Something I don't have a word for." That tiny nod again. Ren smiled. It was the longest conversation they'd had. He still wouldn't speak common tongue. But at night, when the fire burned low and Ren pretended to sleep, she heard him whispering. That same strange language from the first night, rolling and musical, full of sounds that seemed to vibrate in the air like struck bells. She didn't know what he was saying. Prayers, maybe. Or memories. Or conversations with someone only he could hear. Sometimes the words sounded angry. Sometimes they sounded like grief-given voice. Once, she could have sworn she heard him say a name. Aldrich. Over and over, like a wound he couldn't stop touching. She never asked him about it. Some pain was too raw to poke at. The nightmares were the worst part. Ash would be fine all day, quiet and watchful and slowly growing stronger. Then night would fall, and he'd slip into sleep, and the screaming would start. Not words. Just sounds. The kind of sounds that came from a place beyond language, a place where only terror lived. The first time it happened, Ren nearly jumped out of her skin. She scrambled across the shack and grabbed his shoulders, shaking him, calling his name until his eyes flew open, or would have, if they could. His body went rigid, his hands clawing at the air, fighting enemies only he could see. Ash. Ash, you're safe, you're here, it's just a dream. The smell of smoke. That's what triggered it, she learned. Anything that reminded him of fire, a candle burning too close, meat charring over the flames, even the particular scent of certain herbs drying in the heat. And loud sounds. The crack of a branch. A pot clanging against another pot. Anything sudden, anything sharp. His body would go still. His breath would stop. And then he'd either freeze completely or start shaking so hard his teeth chattered. Ren learned to move quietly. To let the fire burn low. To warn him before she did anything that might make noise. She didn't know what had happened to him. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. The Omega shelter sat in a converted stable on the edge of Blackmoor territory. Close enough to the pack lands to receive some protection, far enough that the pack lords didn't have to look at the desperate people who gathered there. Ren had been going since she was 14. Not often, she hated the pity in the volunteers' eyes, the way they looked at her like she was something to be managed rather than helped. But when winter hit hard and she couldn't find enough to scavenge, their bread and thin soup kept her alive. She hadn't been back since buying Ash. Hadn't needed to. But the medicine had taken all her coins, and her herb supply was running low, and she needed to eat something besides boiled roots if she was going to keep producing enough body heat for both of them. The woman at the door, a gray-haired beta named Marta who ran the shelter, took one look at Ren and frowned. "You look like death," Marta said. "Thanks. Can I come in?" Marta's eyes narrowed. "Word is you're harboring someone. An unknown shifter. Young male, no pack markings, no documentation." Ren's stomach dropped. "Who told you that? Does it matter? Half the market saw you drag that creature home." Marta crossed her arms. "You know the rules, girl. Unknown shifters have to be registered with the pack." If he's legitimate, they'll process him into the system. If he's a rogue or a criminal, he's a child. He's a security risk. The Blackmore enforcers don't take kindly to unregistered wolves in their territory. Marta's expression softened slightly. Look, I'm trying to help you. Turn him over. Tell them you found him wandering and didn't know better. They might show mercy. And if they don't? If they decide an undocumented child is too much trouble to keep alive? Silence. That's what I thought. Wren turned away. If you leave now, don't come back, Marta called after her. I won't risk this shelter for one stubborn Omega and her stray. Wren kept walking. The Forbidden Forest had earned its name. 200 years ago, before the current pack system, it had been royal hunting grounds, protected land where only the Wolf King and his court could tread. Now it was just wilderness, slowly reclaiming the old paths and ruins, officially off-limits to anyone without pack authorization. Wren had been sneaking in since she was old enough to climb the boundary wall. The forest was full of herbs that didn't grow anywhere else, roots and mushrooms and flowers worth good coin to the right buyers. Dangerous, yes. But so was starving. She was digging up winterroot near the old stone bridge when she heard them. 3 voices. Male. Laughing. I told you I smelled something. The speaker emerged from between 2 oak trees, his pack tattoo visible on his forearm. Beta Enforcer. One of the Blackmore Patrol wolves. Look at this, boys. An Omega. All alone in our forest. 2 more appeared behind him. Same tattoos. Same hungry expressions. Wren stood slowly, her hands tightening around her digging knife. It was barely sharp enough to cut through root bark. It wouldn't do anything against 3 full-grown betas. I'm just foraging, she said, keeping her voice steady. I'll leave. I don't want any trouble. Too late for that. The lead enforcer moved closer. He was tall, broad, with the kind of casual cruelty in his eyes that said he'd done this before. See, trespassing in the Forbidden Forest is a serious crime. We're well within our rights to detain you. Search you. Make sure you're not carrying anything dangerous. His friends laughed. Wren backed up until her spine hit a tree. Please. I have nothing. I'm no one. Just let me go. But we haven't finished our inspection yet. He reached for her, his hand closing around her throat and squeezing just hard enough to make her gasp. Don't worry. We'll be thorough. She opened her mouth to scream. And the world exploded. That was the only word for it. One moment, the enforcer's hand was on her throat. The next, something hit the clearing like a thunderclap, a wave of pressure so intense that Wren's knees buckled. Dominance. But not like any dominance she'd ever felt. This wasn't the posturing of pack alphas trying to prove their strength. This was something older. Something that reached into the hindbrain and commanded. The 3 enforcers dropped like puppets with cut strings. They didn't just fall, they crumpled, their bodies going limp, their wolves forcibly shoved into submission so hard that Wren could almost feel the psychic impact. And standing at the edge of the clearing, barefoot and swaying, was Ash. He'd followed her. 12 miles of forest, and he'd tracked her without sight, without sound, without leaving any trace she'd noticed. But that wasn't what made Wren's breath catch. Behind him, flickering like a candle in wind, was a shadow. Not his shadow, something else. Something that looked like a wolf if wolves were made of starlight and darkness, of moonlight and void. It was there for only a moment. A heartbeat. Then it vanished, and Ash was just a sick boy again, blood pouring from his nose, his body starting to convulse. Wren caught him before he hit the ground. He was too light. That was all she could think as she carried him home, stumbling through the darkening forest with his limp form draped over her back. Weeks of feeding him, of giving him her own portions, and he still weighed nothing at all. Like his bones were hollow. Like something essential had been carved out of him. His body shook against hers, small tremors that wouldn't stop. His breath came in hitches and gasps. Whatever he'd done back there, it had cost him. "Stay with me," she muttered, shifting his weight as she climbed over a fallen log. "You don't get to die after all this. You hear me? I traded my mother's shawl for you. You owe me." No response. She hadn't expected one. By the time she reached the shack, her arms were screaming and her legs had gone numb. She laid him on the pallet as gently as she could and went to wet a cloth for his face. That's when she saw it. His shirt had torn during his convulsions, pulling away from his chest. And there, directly over his heart, was a scar she'd never noticed before. Not a random wound. Not an accident. A pattern. Interlocking circles, layered symbols, lines that hurt to look at directly. The scar tissue was raised and silver white, standing out against his pale skin like a brand. Ren had heard stories. Everyone had. Tales of the old magic, of the things the royal wolves could do and the things that had been done to stop them. Binding seals. Used to cage a wolf's power, to lock away everything that made them dangerous. The old kings had used them on prisoners and traitors. And someone had carved one directly into this boy's heart. "What are you?" she thought, staring at his still face. "What did they do to you? And why does it feel like I've just stumbled into something that's going to get us both killed?" She didn't have answers. She wasn't sure she wanted them. So she did the only thing she could do, she cleaned the blood from his face, covered him with the only blanket they had, and settled in to watch over him through the night. The dream came between one breath and the next. Ren stood in a castle she'd never seen, but somehow knew. White stone walls. Silver banners. A throne carved from a single piece of moonstone, glowing softly in the darkness. And fire. Fire everywhere. Screams echoed off the walls. People running. Bodies falling. A woman in a crown, a queen, Ren understood instinctively, stood at the center of the chaos, 3 children clutched against her. "Run," the queen commanded someone Ren couldn't see. "Take him and run. They can't find him. If they find him, everything is lost." The smallest child was pulled from her arms. He screamed for his mother. The queen's face crumpled, but she turned away, turning to face the soldiers pouring through the doors. Then the dream shifted, and Ren was somewhere else. A stone chamber. Ancient words carved into the walls, glowing faintly. A prophecy. She could read it somehow, though the language was nothing she knew. The last son of the silver moon will sleep in chains until a heart of pure sacrifice awakens him, and when he rises, empires will fall. The words burned themselves into her mind. A heart of pure sacrifice. Empires will fall. Ren woke gasping, her heart pounding against her ribs. Across the shack, Ash lay motionless on the pallet, his sealed eyes facing the ceiling. And for the first time since she'd bought him, Ren wondered if saving his life might be the thing that ended the world. Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel too. Get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 3. 1 month later, Ren woke to find a dead rabbit on her doorstep and a gold coin tucked inside its mouth. She stared at both for a long moment, then looked up at Ash, who was sitting cross-legged by the fire pit with an expression that might have been innocent on anyone else. "Where did you get the coin?" He tilted his head. Pointed vaguely toward the east. Made a gesture she'd learned meant bad person. "You stole it." A tiny shrug. The corner of his mouth twitched. "Ash, you can't just," she stopped herself, because honestly, what was she going to say? "You can't steal from people?" Half the slums survived on theft. And if he'd taken it from someone who deserved losing it, she wasn't sure she had the moral high ground to lecture him. She picked up the rabbit and the coin. "Thank you. But next time, maybe just the rabbit." That almost smile again. He'd been doing that more lately. Not quite expressions, but hints of them, like emotions trying to break through ice. He was changing. Ren had noticed it gradually at first, the way his clothes started fitting tighter, the way he moved with more certainty. But now, a month after the incident in the forest, the changes were impossible to ignore. Ash was taller. 2 inches at least, maybe 3. His shoulders had broadened, his features sharpening from childish softness into something more angular, more defined. The lean muscle that had started forming on his frame shouldn't have been possible given how little they ate, but there it was, visible when he stretched or reached for something on the higher shelves. He looked 14 now. Maybe 15. Growing into something that would one day be striking, if he survived long enough. His eyes were still sealed. Whatever dark magic held them closed hadn't budged despite everything Ren tried. But he'd adapted so completely that sometimes she forgot he couldn't see. He navigated the rebuilt shack with perfect precision, tracked her movements by sound and scent alone, and once caught a thrown apple out of the air without turning his head. "Show off," she'd muttered. He'd eaten the apple with what she was almost certain was smugness. The common tongue came slowly, one word at a time. He wouldn't speak it around strangers. Went completely silent whenever anyone came near, playing the mute animal the slavers had claimed he was. But alone with Ren, in the quiet hours between dusk and dawn, he'd started offering pieces of language like gifts. "Safe," he said one night, after she'd checked the door for the 3rd time. Pointing at himself, then at her. "Water," when she looked thirsty and hadn't noticed. "Careful," whispered urgently when she reached for a pot that was too hot. Each word came out soft and rough, like something long and used, and he always looked slightly surprised afterward, as if he hadn't meant to speak at all. But the protectiveness, that needed no translation. He growled at anyone who came near their home. Not the enforcers, thankfully, those he hid from, vanishing into the forest so completely that even Ren couldn't find him. But the curious neighbors, the gossiping vendors, the occasional drunk who wandered too close. All of them received warning sounds that shouldn't have been able to come from a boy his size. "You're going to get us in trouble," Ren told him after he'd scared off a particularly nosy herb merchant. Ash made a gesture she'd learned meant don't care. The rumors started 2 weeks ago. Ren first heard them at the market, where she'd gone to trade some of the herbs Ash kept leaving for her. 2 women at the vegetable stall, whispering just loud enough to carry. "Cursed wolf," they say. Blind but sees everything. Took down 3 beta enforcers without touching them. I heard it's a demon. Possessed some poor pup and now it's feeding on the Omega Girl's life force. Someone should report it to the pack. Can't have creatures like that running around unchecked. Ren had grabbed her herbs and left before they could notice her listening. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew. Spread through the slums like sickness, getting wilder with each retelling. The blind wolf became a monster. 3 enforcers became a dozen. Ren became either a witch who controlled it or a victim who needed saving, depending on who was telling the story. She'd known it was only a matter of time before the wrong person heard. Alpha King Kalen Vex had ruled Blackmoor territory for 12 years, since taking the throne from his father at 18. He was 30 now, in the prime of his power, and he'd held that power through a simple philosophy. Threats didn't get trials. Ren had never seen him. Packless Omegas didn't exactly get invited to royal functions. But everyone knew the stories. The ruthlessness. The paranoia. The way he'd executed 3 of his own cousins for conspiring against the crown, though no evidence was ever made public. They said he had seers. Old wolves who could read the threads of fate and warn him of dangers before they materialized. They said the seers had told him something years ago, something that kept him up at night, something he'd been hunting for ever since. A challenger. A threat to his rule. Ren hadn't connected the rumors to herself until the enforcers came. She was foraging in the forest when it happened, gathering winterroot again, further from home than she usually went. Ash had tried to follow, but she'd convinced him to stay behind. The last thing they needed was another incident with patrol wolves. When she came back, the shack was gone. Not burned. Not torn down. Just destroyed. Scattered. Every piece of wood she'd scavenged, every canvas she'd stolen, every blanket and pot and dried herb, thrown across the mudflat like garbage. The enforcers hadn't even tried to hide what they'd done. Boot prints everywhere. Claw marks on the support beams. A message carved into the one wall still standing: "The Alpha King is watching." Ren stood in the wreckage for a long moment. Then her legs gave out, and she knelt in the mud, and she cried. She hadn't cried like this since her parents died. Hadn't let herself. Crying didn't fix anything, didn't rebuild homes or fill empty stomachs or bring back the dead. Crying was a luxury she couldn't afford. But now, with everything she'd built reduced to splinters, with nowhere to go and nothing to her name, she couldn't stop. She cried for her shack. For her mother's shawl that she'd already lost. For the herbs she'd spent months gathering, now trampled into the mud. For the future she'd been stupid enough to hope for. She cried until her chest ached and her eyes burned and her throat felt like she'd swallowed glass. And then she felt a hand on her shoulder. Ash stood beside her. He must have hidden when the enforcers came, must have watched from the trees as they destroyed everything. His face was turned toward the wreckage, his expression unreadable. "We have to run," Ren said, her voice cracking. "We have to lead Blackmore. Tonight. Before they come back." She knew it was hopeless. Winter was coming. They had no supplies, no shelter, no way to survive the cold. Running meant dying slowly instead of quickly, but at least they'd die free. Ash didn't respond. He was still for so long that Ren thought he hadn't hurt her. Then he moved. His hand came up, gentle as falling snow, and cupped her face. Ren went completely still. He'd never initiated contact before. Not once. Not even when she'd held him through his nightmares, not even when she'd carried him home from the forest. He tolerated her touch but never sought it. Until now. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, wiping away a tear. "You saved me," he said. Full sentences. Clear and certain, none of the halting whispers she was used to. His voice was deeper than it had been a month ago, rough with disuse but steady. "You saved me," he repeated. "I will save you. I promise." The words hit her like a physical force. Not because of what they meant, though that was overwhelming enough. But because beneath the words, she felt something else, a rush of emotion that wasn't her own. Determination. Fierce, burning certainty. And something almost like. "We're not alone," said a voice behind them. Ren spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. A figure stood at the edge of the ruined shack, wrapped in a dark cloak with the hood pulled low. Old, hunched, moving with the careful precision of someone whose joints had long since betrayed them. Ash stepped in front of Ren immediately, a growl building in his chest. "Peace, young prince." The figure pushed back her hood, revealing a weathered face and silver-white hair that might once have been beautiful. Her eyes were milky, clouded with age. "I'm not here to hurt either of you. I'm here to explain." "Who are you?" Ren demanded. "My name is Seraphina." The old woman smiled, and it was a sad smile, full of grief and memory. "I was a seer once. I served in the court of the Silver Moon, 300 years ago, before everything burned." Ash went rigid. "Yes," Seraphina said softly, turning her clouded eyes toward him. "I know what you are. I've been waiting for you to wake up for a very long time." They had no shelter, but Seraphina led them to a hollow beneath an ancient oak, hidden by roots thick as Ren's body. It wasn't warm, but it was dry, and the old woman produced a small oil lamp from somewhere in her cloak that cast just enough light to see by. "I don't understand," Ren said, once they were settled. "You said you served 300 years ago. You can't be that old." Seers don't age like normal wolves. Serafina's voice was matter-of-fact. We burn through our lives differently. Some of us fast, dying young. Some of us slow, lingering long past when we should have gone. She smiled that sad smile again. I'm the last of the slow ones. Kept alive by stubbornness and prophecy. Prophecy? The one you dreamed about, child. Don't look so surprised, I can feel the echoes of it on you. The last son of the silver moon will sleep in chains until a heart of pure sacrifice awakens him. She looked at Ash, who had gone completely still. That's what he is. The last son. The only surviving child of Queen Alara and King Theron, the final rulers of the true royal line. Ren's mind raced. The Silver Moon dynasty was destroyed 300 years ago. Everyone knows that. The Vex family slaughtered them in their beds and claimed divine right to the throne. Serafina's voice went hard. Yes. I was there. I watched it happen. Watched Kaelin's ancestors butcher children in their nightclothes, burn the queen alive when she wouldn't stop fighting, hunt down every cousin and nephew and distant relation until they were certain the bloodline was extinct. But they missed one. Not missed. Hidden. Serafina reached out as if to touch Ash, then stopped herself. Queen Alara knew they were coming. She had just enough warning to prepare. She couldn't save herself or her older children, but her youngest, her baby. She had just enough time to seal him. The mark on his chest, Ren breathed. A binding seal. The most powerful one ever created. It locked away everything he was, his wolf, his power, his memories, even his age. Made him small and helpless and forgettable, easy to smuggle out of the castle in the chaos. Serafina's voice cracked slightly. I was supposed to protect him. Raise him. Wake him when the time was right. But they found us. They couldn't sense what he was, not through the seal, but they didn't need to. They captured us both, and when they couldn't break the seal, they sold him to traders who would make sure he disappeared. Ash made a sound. Low and pained. You've been passed from trader to trader for 3 centuries, Serafina told him gently. Sold and resold, beaten and starved, your power fighting the seal from the inside while the magic fought it from the outside. I searched for you every day of my long life. And I failed, over and over. Until I bought him, Ren said. Until you bought him. Serafina turned those milky eyes toward her. Do you know why the seal is breaking, child? Why he's growing stronger, changing, starting to wake up after all this time? Ren shook her head. The seal was designed to hide him until someone worthy could break it. But it can't be broken by force or magic. It can only be broken by sacrifice. Serafina's voice softened. Pure intention. Selfless love. Someone who gives everything they have, not for reward, but simply because they want to help. The words hit Ren like cold water. Every time she went hungry so Ash could eat. Every time she traded her precious belongings for his medicine. Every time she chose him over herself, not because she expected anything in return, but because she couldn't stand to watch him suffer. I wasn't trying to break anything, she whispered. I was just trying to keep him alive. I know. Serafina smiled, and this time it wasn't sad. That's why it worked. The seal requires sacrifice with no ulterior motive, no secret agenda, no hope of personal gain. You didn't know what he was. You didn't know what you were doing. You just saw a dying child and decided to save him, even when it cost you everything you had. Ren looked at Ash. He was facing her now, those sealed eyes somehow finding her despite the darkness. It's almost broken, Serafina continued. Another day, maybe less. And when it shatters completely, he'll wake up. Fully. His power, his memories, his wolf, all of it will come rushing back. That's good, Ren said. Isn't it? It's necessary. But it's also dangerous. Serafina's voice went grave. When the seal breaks, it will send out a beacon. A pulse of royal power so strong that every wolf on this continent will feel it. Including Kalen Vex. The Alpha King. The one who'd sent enforcers to ransack her home. The one whose ancestors had murdered Ash's entire family. He'll come for us, Ren said flatly. He'll bring an army. Ash's hand found Ren's in the darkness. His grip was firm, certain. Then we fight, he said. 3 words. Simple. Absolute. Serafina laughed, a dry, crackling sound. You'll need to, young prince. When you wake, you'll have power beyond anything the Vex line can imagine. But power means nothing without control, and control takes time you may not have. Then we give him time, Ren said, surprising herself with her own certainty. We run, we hide, we buy him whatever he needs to learn what he can do. And if running isn't enough? Ren looked at Ash. At this strange, impossible boy who left rabbits on her doorstep and growled at nosy neighbors and had just promised to save her like it was the simplest thing in the world. Then we figure something else out, she said. Together. The seal broke at midnight. Ren didn't know what woke her. One moment she was asleep, curled against the oak's roots with Ash beside her. The next moment she was bolt upright, her heart pounding, her skin prickling with something that felt like lightning building before a storm. Ash was convulsing. Not like before, not like the episode in the forest. This was worse. His body arched off the ground, his mouth open in a silent scream, light pouring from the seal on his chest, silver light, blinding and beautiful and terrible. Ash! Ren grabbed for him, trying to hold him down, trying to do something, anything. The light exploded. It burst outward in a wave that knocked Ren flat, that shook the ancient oak to its roots, that rolled across the forest and the slums and the packlands beyond like a tide of pure power. And then it was gone, and the night was quiet, and Ash lay still on the ground. His eyes were open. Not sealed anymore. Not crusted with dark magic or hidden behind scarred tissue. Open. They were silver. Pure, liquid silver, catching the moonlight and reflecting it back tenfold. Old eyes. Ancient eyes. Eyes that had seen things Ren couldn't imagine, that held memories spanning centuries. Ash, she whispered. He turned his head toward her. Blinked once, slowly, like someone learning to use their body again. Then he spoke. Not in the common tongue. Not in the halting fragments she was used to. In the ancient language of the first wolves, fluid and resonant, and somehow, she understood. I remember now, he said. I remember everything. Across the continent, in a castle built on the bones of the Silver Moon dynasty, Alpha King Kalen Vex woke from a dead sleep with a scream on his lips. His wolf was howling. Not in challenge. In terror. Something was coming. Something old. Something that should have stayed buried 300 years ago. Kalen threw off his blankets and strode to the window, staring out at the moonlit landscape. His hands were shaking. He knew what he'd felt. He knew what that pulse of power meant. The true king had returned. And empires were about to fall. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 4. 3 months after Ren bought a worthless pup for 5 coins. He barely fit in the shack anymore. Ren stood in the doorway, watching Ash duck through the frame she'd rebuilt twice now to accommodate his changing height. 6'4", last time she'd measured him against the doorpost. Shoulders broad enough to block the light. Silver hair that fell past his shoulders in waves she'd learned to braid during the quiet evenings when his memories became too heavy to carry alone. He wasn't a boy anymore. He wasn't even quite a man. He was something older, something that wore human skin like a borrowed coat, something that looked at the world through silver eyes that saw far more than they should. Those eyes could read fate itself, Serafina had explained. The threads of possibility that wove through every living thing. It was a gift of the royal bloodline, one that had made the Silver Moon dynasty nearly impossible to overthrow. Until their enemies had learned that you didn't need to defeat someone who could see the future if you simply killed them while they slept. You're staring, Ash said without turning around. You're blocking all my light. He moved aside, that almost smile playing at the corner of his mouth. It came easier now, that expression. More natural. But there were still moments when his face went blank and his eyes went distant, when the ancient king and the frightened boy fought for control of the same body. The 3 centuries of forced sleep had damaged him in ways they were still discovering. Memory surfaced at random, the taste of his mother's perfume, the sound of his brother's laughter, the exact color of the flames that had consumed his home. Sometimes he knew everything, spoke with the certainty of someone who had lived through empires rising and falling. Sometimes he woke up screaming, clawing at his chest where the seal had been, not knowing where he was or why the small Omega girl was calling him by the wrong name. Ash. Not his true name. That one he still hadn't told her, though she suspected he remembered it now. Serafina sent word, he said, pulling a folded paper from his coat. 3 more families have pledged loyalty. The Thornwoods from the Eastern Territory, the Blackbriar twins, and, his voice caught slightly. The Moonshadows. They were my mother's kin. That's good news. It's complicated news. He set the paper on the table, his jaw tight. They want to meet the king they're pledging to. They want proof that I'm what Serafina claims. You'll show them. And if I can't? He turned to face her, and for a moment she saw the boy underneath. The one who still flinched at loud sounds, who still woke gasping from nightmares, who still reached for her hand in the darkness without meaning to. The power comes and goes, Ren. Sometimes I feel like I could tear mountains apart. Sometimes I can barely light a candle. What if they come expecting a king and find? He gestured at himself helplessly. They'll find you, Ren said simply. And that's enough. The wanted posters appeared the next morning. Ren found one nailed to a tree at the edge of the forest, the ink still wet. Ash's face stared back at her, not quite accurate, the artist had made him look more savage than he was, more feral. But recognizable enough. Rogue threat, the poster declared. By order of Alpha King Kalen Vex. 10,000 gold coins for capture. Dead or alive. 10,000 gold coins. Enough to buy a house in the wealthy districts. Enough to live comfortably for a decade. Enough to tempt anyone who'd ever looked at Ren and her strange companion and wondered. She tore the poster down, but she knew there would be more. Hundreds more. Thousands, probably, spreading across every territory the Vex family controlled. When she got back to the shack, she found 3 of her former neighbors loitering nearby. They scattered when they saw her coming, but not before she caught the calculation in their eyes. 10,000 gold coins. The hunt had begun. The next few weeks blurred together in a haze of fear and preparation. Serafina arrived with her loyal families, a dozen wolves at first, then 2 dozen, then more. They came in secret, traveling at night, pledging their lives to a king most of them had never seen. They looked at Ash with something like awe, and Ren watched him straighten his spine and square his shoulders and become, for a few hours at a time, the ruler they needed him to be. Then the visitors would leave, and he would collapse into a chair with his head in his hands, shaking. I don't know how to do this, he said one night, when it was just the 2 of them. I remember the theory. I remember watching my father hold court, my mother negotiate with foreign pacts. But I was 7 years old. I was supposed to have decades more to learn before any of this fell on me. You'll figure it out. And if I don't? If I lead these people to their deaths because I'm not ready, not strong enough, not. Ash. She knelt beside his chair, taking his hands the way she had 100 times before. You survived 300 years of torture because something inside you refused to break. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen. His silver eyes met hers, and for a moment he looked almost young again. You always know what to say. I really don't. I just keep talking until something sounds right. That surprised a laugh out of him, a real one, warm and unexpected. He'd been laughing more lately. Smiling more. Becoming someone who might actually survive what was coming. Which was why Ren needed to leave. She packed her bag at midnight. Not much to pack, really. A change of clothes. Some dried herbs. The 12 coppers she'd saved from selling rabbits that Ash kept bringing her. Everything she owned fit in a single canvas sack, just like it had 3 months ago. The shack was quiet. Ash was outside, meeting with Serafina about troop movements and defensive positions and all the other things that kings apparently needed to worry about. He wouldn't notice her absence for hours. By then, she'd be deep in the Forbidden Forest, heading toward the border. She'd thought about this for weeks. Turned it over in her mind during the long nights when she couldn't sleep, when she watched Ash transform from a broken boy into something magnificent and terrifying. She was a liability. A packless Omega with no power, no status, no connections. She'd been useful when he was dying, anyone could pour broth down a sick child's throat. But now? Now he was becoming a king. Now he had armies pledging loyalty and ancient families offering their swords and an empire to reclaim. What did she have to offer? Cabbage scraps and stubbornness? Every day she stayed was another day Kalen Vex could use her against him. Hostage. Leverage. A weakness to exploit. The smart thing, the right thing, was to disappear before she got him killed. She hoisted her bag over her shoulder and slipped out the back door. The forest was dark and cold, the kind of cold that seeped into bones and stayed there. Ren pulled her coat tighter. A real coat now, something Ash had procured for her from somewhere he wouldn't explain, and started walking. She made it almost to the tree line before a voice stopped her. Running? She froze. Ash emerged from the shadows like he'd grown from them, his silver eyes catching the moonlight. He was still in his meeting clothes, the simple dark shirt and trousers that passed for formal wear in their makeshift court. But he didn't look like he'd been in a meeting. He looked like he'd been tracking her since the moment she left the shack. You shouldn't be out here, Ren said. If the patrols. The patrols answer to Kalen Vex. Who will be dead within the month, if my plans hold? He stepped closer, and she saw the tension in his jaw, the careful control he was exerting over every muscle. You didn't answer my question. I'm not running. I'm being practical. By leaving in the middle of the night without saying goodbye? Goodbyes make things harder. Harder for who? He was close enough now that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. When had he gotten so tall? When had she stopped noticing the changes day by day and started just accepting him as he was, this beautiful, impossible creature who'd somehow grown from the wreckage she'd pulled out of the mud? For you, she said. You're going to be a king, Ash. You're going to have courts and councils and people who actually know how to help you. You don't need some Omega scavenger girl trailing after you like a lost puppy. Something flickered in his eyes. Something that might have been hurt, if ancient kings could be hurt by packless orphans. Is that what you think you are to me? That's what I am. I was useful when you were broken. I'm not useful anymore. He laughed. It wasn't the warm laugh from earlier, it was sharp and brittle and didn't reach his eyes. Useful, he repeated. You think I kept you around because you were useful? Why else would you? You saw me when I was nothing. His voice dropped, roughened, became something she'd never heard from him before. Not the frightened boy. Not the uncertain king. Something deeper. Something that resonated in her chest like a second heartbeat. You saw me beaten and broken and worthless, and you spent your last coins to buy my life. Not because you knew what I was. Not because you expected anything in return. You just looked at a dying creature in the mud and decided I deserved to live. Anyone would have. No one else did. He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his skin. The traders who owned me for decades. The buyers who passed me over. The 1,000 people who walked past that auction block without a second glance. You were the one who stopped. You were the one who saw something worth saving. Ren's throat tightened. I couldn't watch them kill you. And afterward? When you went hungry so I could eat. When you sold your mother's shawl, the only thing you had left of her, to buy medicine for my infections? His hands came up, cupping her face the way he had months ago in the wreckage of her home. That wasn't practicality, Ren. That was something else entirely. I don't know what you want me to say. Say you'll stay. I can't. I don't belong in your world. You're going to have wolves lining up to serve you. Noble families, powerful allies, people who can actually help you win this war. What am I supposed to do? Stand in the corner and watch. He pulled back slightly, and for a long moment he just looked at her. Those silver eyes that could see the threads of fate, studying her like she was a puzzle he was still figuring out. Then he dropped to his knees in the mud. Ash, what are you? Every court will have wolves who want my power. His voice was steady, certain, the voice of the king he was becoming. They'll want my throne, my favor, my bloodline. They'll bow and scrape and tell me what they think I want to hear, and every single one of them will be calculating what they can gain. He took her hands in his, kneeling before her in the dirt like she was the one wearing a crown. But you wanted none of that. You didn't want power or status or wealth. You just wanted me to live. You looked at the lowest, most worthless thing in that market and decided it was worth everything you had. His thumbs traced circles on her palms. I will reclaim my crown. I will burn Kalen Beck's legacy to ash. I will build something new from the ruins of what he destroyed. But none of it means anything without you beside me. You're the only person in 300 years who saw me as something other than a weapon or a threat or a means to an end. You're the reason I survived. The reason I want to survive. His silver eyes blazed with something fierce and desperate. Stay with me. Not because I need your skills or your connections. Stay with me because I need you. Ren opened her mouth to argue, to explain all the logical reasons why this was a terrible idea, why she'd only slow him down, why. And then she felt it. A warmth spreading through her chest. Not painful, not sharp, just warm, like sunlight after a long winter. It started somewhere behind her ribs and radiated outward, filling every corner of her body with something that felt almost like coming home. Her wolf, the small, quiet thing she'd almost forgotten she had, stirred for the first time in years. Mate, it whispered. Mine. That's not possible, she breathed. What isn't? Omegas don't, we can't, the bloodlines are too different. Royals mate with royals, or at least with powerful alphas. They don't. She pressed her hand to her chest, where the warmth was still spreading. They don't bond with packless scavenger girls. Ash's expression shifted. Understanding dawned in his silver eyes, followed by something that looked almost like wonder. The mate bond, he said softly. It's not supposed to work like this. My line was known for defying the old laws. He rose from his knees, but he didn't let go of her hands. My grandfather mated with a human woman. My great-aunt chose a wolf from a conquered tribe. The Silver Moon dynasty never cared much for supposed to. Ash. Do you feel it? She should lie. Should tell him she didn't feel anything, that it was just stress or fear or some kind of magical side effect. Should protect them both from a bond that would paint an even bigger target on her back. But she'd never been able to lie to him. Yes, she whispered. I feel it. His smile could have lit up the whole forest. The advance guard arrived at midnight. 20 wolves in battle formation, led by a massive beta with scars across his face and cruelty in his eyes. Kalen Beck's general, according to Serafina. The one who'd personally overseen the execution of suspected Silver Moon sympathizers for the past decade. They expected to find a scared Omega and a half-feral pup. They found something else entirely. Ash stepped out of the shack to meet them, and Ren watched from the shadows as he transformed. Not slowly, not gradually. One moment he was standing there in human form, a tall young man with silver hair and strange eyes. The next moment his body was shifting, bones cracking and reforming, muscle and sinew reshaping themselves into something massive and terrifying. His wolf was enormous. Bigger than any wolf she'd seen before. Bigger than the Beta General, bigger than the enforcers flanking him, bigger than wolves were supposed to be. Silver fur that glowed in the moonlight. Eyes that burned like twin moons, ancient and terrible and beautiful. The general's confident expression faltered. What? Ash moved. He tore through the advance guard like paper. No hesitation, no wasted motion, just pure, devastating efficiency. Wolves fell around him, throats torn, bodies broken, their pathetic attempts at defense crumbling before power they couldn't comprehend. The general lasted longest. He managed to shift, managed to bare his teeth and lunge forward, managed to believe for one brief moment that his experience might make a difference. Ash caught him by the throat and slammed him into the ground hard enough to shake the earth. Then he threw back his head and held. It wasn't just a howl. It was a command. Ancient words wrapped in sound, power that reached into the bones of every wolf within miles and demanded obedience. Ren felt it even from the shadows. The overwhelming urge to kneel, to submit, to bare her throat to the Silver King. Kneel, the howl said. Or burn. Across the slums, wolves stumbled out of their homes, falling to their knees without understanding why. In the Blackmore Packlands, enforcers who had been preparing to march found their legs buckling beneath them. Somewhere in the distance, Beta General Seraphina smiled as she watched a dozen more families fall to their knees and pledge loyalty to a king they could suddenly feel in their very souls. The howl echoed across the territory. And in his castle, Alpha King Kalen Vex heard it too. Ash shifted back to human form as the sun crept over the horizon, painting the destruction in shades of gold and red. Bodies littered the ground around him. He was covered in blood, none of it his. His chest heaved with exertion, but his eyes were clear, focused, more present than Ren had ever seen them. He was terrifying. He was beautiful. He was hers. Ren stepped out of the shadows, picking her way through the carnage until she stood before him. He reached for her immediately, pulling her against his chest, his forehead pressing to hers. "They'll come for us now," he whispered. His voice was hoarse from the howl, rough with power still bleeding off him in waves. All of them. Kalen, his allies, wolves who want me dead, wolves who want to use me. This was just the beginning. I know. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Battles. Politics. Centuries of hatred and fear to overcome. His silver eyes met hers, and beneath the power and the ancient rage, she could still see the boy she'd saved. The one who left rabbits on her doorstep. The one who reached for her hand in the darkness. Are you ready to be a queen, little Omega? Ren. Who 3 months ago was scavenging vegetable scraps to survive, who spent her last 5 coins on a creature everyone called worthless, who had never imagined a future beyond making it through another winter, looked up at the ancient king who was now hers. Her mate. Her purpose. Her impossible, beautiful, terrifying destiny. I was never ready for any of this, she said honestly. But I'm not letting go. His smile was fierce and tender all at once. Good, he said. Neither am I. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe, like and share this video to continue listening to this type of story daily and also, to appreciate this community too. I would like to hear your wonderful opinion about this story. Please comment below.